Well, I hope you like music because today is all about the blues.
The largest marketplace in Europe to buy and sell your card.
Alright, hear me out. It turns out blue cards are very strong and making lists of blue cards is much more difficult than other colors, but obviously we didn't shy anywhere, so we assembled the best list of blue cards and it turns out number 5 is one of the most iconic ones of all time. It's Counterspell. What? Counterspell. Counterspell.
You can't.
No, Counterspell.
Counter argument.
That's how it feels to play against Counterspell.
Counterspell.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly how it feels.
So no joke, I mean, it is a meme a little bit at this point. I once, in my children's playgroup, when I was little, had a row of no counterspells.
Nice.
I mean, it's not only that, we see this in the comments all the time. People actually, especially new players, I believe, but maybe just a vast majority, distaste counterspell so much it actually makes them upset. They have rules where you can't play counterspells. They get upset at us in the comments if we play counterspells. They say blue is the worst color ever.
It is the worst color ever.
And it's funny because no one says that about Doomblade.
Yeah, but it's the same effect,
Yeah.
right? Like, it just feels so much worse.
Such a mental study. I play my Colossal Giant Counterspell. Oh, it resolves. Doomblade. Okay, that's fine.
That's a fair interaction in Magic.
Yeah, something about people telling you what you can or can't do is upsetting. Who would have
Shocking.
known? Yeah. But obviously Counterspell is one of the most efficient and broke one out of all of these. I mean,
Yeah.
Counterspells are to this day a very iconic part of Magic.
I mean, you just pay 2 mana and trade for anything that your opponent most likely paid more mana for.
The card Counterspell is so iconic that it's used as a term for any other spell that counters cards. Counterspell.
There was a long time where they assumed Counterspell would be too good for Modern. Eventually they added it to Modern again through like the only Modern set. You couldn't play it in Standard, and it turns out to be fine.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, it's actually a fair card, but I mean, Modern has seen quite some power increase.
But for context, what's important about Counterspell is the fact that most of the ways you interact with cards is by removing them, trading via creature combat. This is your only ability to prevent enter the battlefield effects on creatures, to prevent instants and sorceries and enchantments without removing them with things like disenchant. What you're trading for this all-around range of power is the fact that you have to interact with it the moment it's being put on the stack, as your opponent casts it. If you were tapped out, or if you forgot to do it, or if you decided maybe I'll do it later, you can't change your mind. It's done. It's already on the stack.
I mean, imagine, the equivalent for black would be like black, destroy a creature, or an enchantment, or an artifact, or, you know, if there's an effect on the stack you don't like. Like, it's so versatile, like, to
But it needs to be exactly that moment.
Yeah, exactly. That
And
is the downside.
It turns out 2 is exactly the number that is right now okay or a little bit too powerful. But with 3, you can add so many text to counterspells and make them, I guess, playable. I mean,
there were times during Standard where the 3 mana counterspells, they were always seeing play. It was always just the flavor of the month, like Disallow. Dissipate actually saw a bunch of play. It just exiles the spell instead of putting it into
Which
the
was
graveyard.
really powerful with spells with flashback and stuff.
dissolve, all of those little things that were kind of good, but made you pay 3 mana instead of 2.
Number 4.
Counterspell.
All right, let's move on to number 3.
Easy.
Well, actually, let's stay with number 4. It required some experimentation because you had to be a real tinkerer to build around it. It's Tinker. You sacrifice an artifact for 3 mana. You get any artifact from your deck.
Any artifact?
Any artifact. As long as it's an artifact.
It could be a boat.
It could be a boat.
Could it be a boat?
I think
Mr. Carl? I'm not sure there's a boat that's an artifact.
I reckon there's some artifact boat.
There's the boat that's an artifact.
You mean the
Console
ship,
flagship.
the ship boat? Yeah.
It's flagship.
All right, well, at the point that Flagship was printed, there were way more powerful artifacts to get, and I reckon this card is once again a card that suffers from the old, oh, well, it could be fine right now because artifacts aren't very powerful, or like there's not too crazy things to get, and then down the lane, they just printed absurd stuff. How about a Blightsteel Colossus on turn 1, 2, or 3, like whenever you get the mana to cast the Tinker? How about, you know, having an 11/11 Infect Trample on the board?
Turns out even back then it was too good. Or winning the World Championship.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely very powerful.
Whether it's getting you an Inkwell Leviathan or a Memory Jar to just combo off, honestly, like that, it was such a combo enabler. The fact that you would just need to put one of these cards in your deck and you'd always be able to get it with Tinker as long as you had other artifacts to sacrifice. I mean, this card too strong.
Yeah, looking at the whole group of cards, is kind of insane because they're naturally printed all over, especially artifacts which tend to be way more expensive once you look at the power. But also, if you consider the mana difference you get for almost no cost, right? You pay 3 and the artifact, which is usually 1 or 0 or whatever, and you get 10, 11.
Yep. And even if you consider like, okay, 11 mana for a Blightsteel Colossus or something is probably overpriced in terms of, like, you wouldn't actually want to pay 11 mana for something like that. You're getting like 8 mana. Like, you're still getting an obscene amount of mana value onto the board.
It's also just for the versatility. Sometimes you're cheating on mana. Sometimes you're even just getting a Masticore to make sure that's what you need in the moment back in the old days. And sometimes you're just getting the right artifact hit piece you needed. Maybe it's a Winter Orb, and because you knew in this very moment this is what would win you the game. So the fact that you could just get anything, these 3 mana, and this 1 card could be just about any artifact in your deck.
Yeah, though personally, we have talked about Demonic Tutor and flexibility in tutors in general. I feel like Tinker's power comes way more from the mana brokenness, right? And less from the versatility, whereas the other tutors, often their power purely lies in the versatility.
Although back then you did have a lot of flexibility. You could either get a big creature or save your life with Crumbling Sanctuary. That turns your library into your life total. Or you get Mishra's Helix, which taps lands. So back then, it was close enough that you had a decision.
And I'd argue that is because there were no like huge payoffs. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because the huge payoffs swayed the decision so much into their direction.
Although you get now Phyrexian Portal, or Portal to Phyrexia.
True.
Which is somewhat of a choice if you want to kill your opponent's board or put it to
I love that you now have the choice between the broken interaction or the broken creature.
It gives you a choice.
It could be both with Phyrexian Portal, because then you bring their big creatures back.
Yeah.
Indeed. Oh, good times.
Number 3 is debatable because, well, it's a creature and blue is not famously known for the power of creatures.
A creature.
Okay.
But we feel like we had to add a creature because
Snapcaster.
Oh, Snapcaster Mage is pretty good.
surprisingly not Snapcaster Mage, although Snapcaster Mage is one of the best cards of all time.
Peregrine Drake?
Delve of Secrets.
Oh.
Yeah, that one go. I mean, they're from the same set. It's basically Snapcaster Mage in spirit.
Yes. Or it's the one
An
that's
insect
actually played
aberration.
in Legacy. Yeah, so you have a 1/1 for 1 mana. Why is that so broken?
Because it's not usually a 1/1 for 1 mana.
Turns into a
But
3/2.
it says so on the card. At the beginning of your... no, that's the text that makes it better. Yeah, at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card. If in an instance of a card revealed this way, transform it into a 3/2 flyer. Turns out this is not only mostly a 3/2 flyer in the formats where you can manipulate your library, it's also a way to not draw the card if you don't want it.
Yeah, it's almost like a scry if you have any manipulation effect. If you have a Thoughtscour in hand, you look, it's a land, you didn't want a land. You Thoughtscour, you put the cards in your graveyard.
Yeah, so more often than not, if you have a fetch land or if you have something that mills something from your library, you can turn that into a draw card because you didn't have to draw.
So you're telling me a 1 mana 1/1 that scries every turn is the most broken creature?
Yeah. Let's still all agree that what's powerful about this is that in blue, you get a 3/2 flyer for 1 mana.
And it's so absurd because new cards, sometimes they exile themselves, they come back as the flip side. No, this one just transforms. So it was already on the battlefield at the start of your turn, so you can just straight up attack with the 3/2 flyer on turn 2.
So the archetypes that usually play these, for context, if you haven't seen them, they're called Delver decks in general. Even when they don't have Delver of Secrets in them, people still refer to this Protect the Queen strategy as Delver. Whereas you put a creature on the board, usually it doesn't cost a lot of mana and usually has some power. And then everything else in your deck is usually instants and sorceries made to protect it or counter your opponent's game plan. Either the card Counterspell, 5th most powerful blue card. Either it's just straight up bounce spells, removal of some kind if you're playing other colors.
Yeah, usually you have to protect your creature from opposing removal spells and get rid of your opponent's blockers because you don't want them to just block your creature and trade. But I feel like the more powerful Delver these days is actually Ragavan, where if you protect that one, you just run away with the game, whereas this one, 3 damage a turn is nice, like it's pressure, definitely. But why not both, honestly?
You know what the advantage of a Delve of Secrets is?
It's flying.
Yes. True. We're done. No, it's actually blue. So once you are in the late game and you couldn't really cast it or didn't want to, you could pitch it to Force of Will.
True.
And that means it's never really dead, which is obviously the advantage of the color blue. But in that case, it's very good early because you put the pressure on and still usable late game.
Then let me argue in favor of my monkey Ragavan. Read the last line of Ragavan. It has dash. It is also relevant in the late game.
You can also pitch it to Fury.
Yeah, but Fury is much worse than Force of Will.
Also, Delver lets you play around Plummet by deciding not to flip it.
Right, yeah. And Delver
Versatility.
doesn't have double strike, which sometimes is an actual downside. Yeah.
Number 2 and number 1, you guessed it. No use in making you wait till we go through all the numbers. It's Ancestral Recall and Time Walk, the most powerful blue cards in Magic.
No, that's just boring. Like,
It is kind of predictable.
you can't just.
We all
Everyone knows
know the Power 9 cards are powerful. They're called the Power 9. Okay,
Yeah, no.
okay. Let's do some other ones. Wait. Let me. Treasure Cruise. The next best thing to Ancestral Recall. It's closely the same thing.
Basically, it's a sorcery instead of an instant. You have to exile 7 cards off of your graveyard.
So Ancestral Recall is a 1 blue mana instant that just says draw 3 cards. It's a little bit too strong for Magic. Treasure Cruise, on the other hand, is
also too strong for Magic.
yes, as we know, it's banned in most of the formats it's usually allowed to be played in. It's a 8 mana spell that says draw 3 cards, sorcery, which would be terrible, but it has Delve, allowing you to exile cards from your graveyard, and for every card you exile, you reduce the cost by 1, meaning if you had 7 cards in your graveyard, it's a 1 mana draw 3 cards.
Let me tell you, when that card was released, people were stoked for it. People knew how powerful Delve was, and people played it everywhere.
And they figured it wouldn't be played very long.
Yeah, no, everyone played it. Delver decks, combo decks, mid-range decks splashed for it just to
Burn was playing it. That's when you saw this is not a blue card. I know it's blue, but it's not actually a blue card because everyone played it.
Yeah.
If you were playing Modern or Legacy, you would just play you'd play fetch lands, so you at least get your 1 land that would also tap for blue, and then you would just be treasure cruising because everyone loves drawing 3 cards.
Yeah, it also really got people back on the Thought Scour train. Like, people suddenly loved playing Thought Scour again, targeting themselves.
And for those of you who mostly play Standard maybe, or who don't understand how, this seems like a steep cost, exiling 7 cards from your graveyard. That usually happens really late in the game. In a lot of formats, there's a lot of ways to either put cards in your graveyard, either from milling, or if you sacrifice a land to go get another land that's a land in your graveyard, or they play a lot of dig spells. In Magic, you're generally incentivized to play a lot of spells that allow you to manipulate the top of your library and draw a few more cards. It's card advantage. So the more of those you play, the more you have in your graveyard, and the better they make Treasure Cruise.
The other way you can see it, because you remove the card from mana, it gives you a mana once you exile it, right? So whenever you play a card, it has the hidden text of adding a mana later in the game. So your 1 mana spells become practically free because you get the return of full, but your 3 and 4 mana spells only become like a third free. So it's much better with the cheaper cards, which are way more in Legacy, than in Standard where, well, you slowly ramp up.
Also, blue has an identity, so as you might have noticed, Counterspell is a cheap spell that interacts and adds to the graveyard. Delver of Secrets wants you to play a lot of instants and sorceries and manipulate the top of your library. All of these together with cards like Opt or Consider are just generally advancing the game plan that blue wants to do anyways. They're just really good with Treasure Cruise.
Though I do feel like these days, Delve is a steeper cost to pay than back in the day. I feel like recently there has days. Delve is a common interaction with the graveyard. I'm not sure. I'm not trying to make the point that Treasure Cruise would be fine in Modern these days. I don't think it is, but I think delving is a steeper cost than it used to be.
For context, Treasure Cruise is currently in cardboard jail. It's banned in Modern. It's banned in Legacy. It's restricted in Vintage. It's banned in Pauper.
It's playable in Pioneer. Do we know?
Yes, and it's most commonly played in the most powerful deck is at Phoenix.
Now coming to number 1, before we say it, as I said, the blue cards are very good. There's a long list and we could have picked many options. So we did pick many options, but not shown because it's a 5 cards. But if you want to see which other options there are of criminally good blue cards, you can look in the description below. There you find the link to the inside article, which mentions all the other cards
that we considered.
Yeah.
Even if you're going down to the comments, we'll pin a comment with a link.
In the meantime, what's number 1, Toffel?
It's Time Walk By. No. Yes, it is a card that many consider to be an art.
I was Consider, because that would be shocking.
No, it's not shock. It's not consider. It's not art. It's basically art. People say it's an art. There have been articles of many thousand words on how to play that card. And I can tell you, I've played Legacy once. I've cast this a bunch in a row. My hands always turn up worse. I mean, it should be better. It's Brainstorm.
Yeah, I don't think I've resolved a brainstorm correctly in my life, like to the full efficiency of the card.
I love how number 1 and number 2 are basically knockoff Ancestral Recalls.
Yeah.
Like them trying to make Ancestral Recall worse, but still allow it.
Yeah, I mean, you could technically not argue Brainstorm is a different card, but in most of effects in the library,
There's
some
the
ways
text
where
draw 3 cards on it.
sometimes you want your cards in your library, but yes, it's in an effective way. It's, well, draw 1 card if you do the math correctly, but why is it more than 1?
Well, you just draw 3 new cards, and then you take 2 bad cards off of your hand, put them on top of your deck, and then you shuffle your deck somehow, usually with fetch lands.
Not only shuffling your deck, sometimes you want them on top. Terminus in the Miracles deck, which was a very popular Legacy deck.
Better than Ancestral Recall.
Yeah, because you get to put a Terminus on the top of your library.
Yeah, not kidding. It was important for counterbalance, the miracle cards. I mean, nobody would argue it's better than Ancestral Recall, but there were some applications to putting cards back into your library.
I mean, we mentioned Delver of Secrets before. That one cares about the top of your library.
Right. If you draw your artifact for Tinker, you can put it back.
Yeah, you can put stuff back into your library for tutor effects, for cascade effects, for example.
Protect from discard effects.
Oh yeah, that's one other really neat interaction. Someone Thoughtseize you, and your key combo interaction is in your hand. You cast Brainstorm, you put it on top of your library, they can't take it.
And the next level of that is you keep your key piece in hand because they assume there's a second one on top because you wouldn't have left the key piece in your hand.
One of the things where I found Brainstorm kind of insane, and that is a common occurrence in Pauper, is when you put back Squadron Hawks.
Oh yeah, it's basic. This is the closest it'll ever get to Ancestral Recall. Because hear me out. You have Squadron Hawks in your hand. You cast Squadron Hawk, and while it enters the battlefield, it tells you you can go search your deck for 3 Squadron Hawks, but you don't have them because they're in your hand.
Yeah.
So what you do is with that trigger on the stack, you cast Brainstorm, you draw 3 cards, put the 2 cards you're about to put into your hand on top of your library, and then get them with Squadron Hawk. And this is how you do Ancestral Recall at home.
I love that it's Ancestral Recall, but you have to play a really bad 2-mana 1/1.
Those are fighting words, Yamin.
They're fine. They're unblockable because they're flying.
It's the Ancestral Recall of birds because you play the bird and it draws you 3 birds.